While a land acknowledgement is not enough, it is an important social justice and decolonial practice that promotes Indigenous visibility and a reminder that we are on settled Indigenous land. All right. So we have 5 panelists here today. Franklin Alongi is an undergraduate student at Montana State University, pursuing a bachelor's in science and in plant biology from the Department of Plant Science and Plant Technology. He is actively involved in research pertaining to biotic and antibiotic stress plant space, focusing on high elevation 5-needled pine such as white bark pine and limber pine. As a sophomore at MSU, Franklin was a recipient of the Goldwater Scholarship. Coming from metropolitan Louisville, Kentucky, Franklin's curiosity and love for the outdoors started with family trips to Yellowstone and resulted in Franklin choosing to follow his passion at MSU and pursue the field of ecological research. When not in his study, Franklin enjoys learning languages, cooking, baking, and running. Sheridan Brown grew up outside of Yellowstone National Park in Gardner, Montana, and decided to attend Montana State University. She is currently finishing her undergraduate degree in biochemistry and microbiology. She'll be graduating in the spring and will be attending graduate school in the fall to obtain a doctorate in structural biology and biophysics. During her time at MSU, she has worked in Dr. Martin Lawrence's lab, studying the structure and function of CRISPR-Cas proteins. Her work there has culminated in a first author publication and the Goldwater Scholarship in 2020. In her free time, she enjoys hiking and taking care of house plants. Soraya Coleman received the Truman Scholarship in 2019 from her home state of Wyoming. Her work centers around youth empowerment, including presenting during Expanding Your Horizons, coaching track and field, and fundraising for Ugandan education. Research has been an important tool for her public service, including the neuroscience research in the Lefkert Lab and her social science research in Uganda. She is also the founder of her own nonprofit organization called Positivity Outward, which empowers rural youth to reflect and act through mentorship. Since graduating in May 2020, she has worked full-time on founding and growing Positivity Outward, slowly learning how to build a business startup that integrates her research background while maintaining a community-centered approach. She will be attending MSU's new Masters in Innovation and Management this fall, and with the support of the Truman to better run the organization. Max Yates is a senior at MSU studying biochemistry with minors in economics, global health, and Hispanic studies. He was selected as a 2020 Truman Scholar for Montana and hopes to obtain an MD, MPH to change the structure of the U.S. healthcare system to better benefit rural and underserved communities. In his free time, he loves to bike, ski, fish, and spend time with friends. Taylor Blossom is a 5th-year senior from Helena, Montana, studying chemical engineering and economics. He served 2 terms as student body president, focusing on increasing student civic participation and securing state funding for higher education. Taylor has worked in data analytics for several political campaigns and coordinated his university's voter registration program for the 2020 election. Taylor received the Shwartzman in the fall of 2020 and hopes to explore how relations with China can improve election security in the 21st century. In his spare time, Taylor enjoys climbing, biking, hunting, and fencing. Thank you all so much for coming to talk to us today. For those of you just joining us, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please post them in the chat, and we hope to have an open Q&A at the end. So I'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions we've had submitted from students. So, how did your personal process start, and why did you apply for this scholarship?
I'd be happy to kick us off with that, if that sounds all right. My personal process with the Truman Scholarship started definitely a couple years before, as I'm sure that everyone else on this panel can attest to, is that it's typically not the manifestation of just wanting to apply for a scholarship, but instead some other work that you've been personally passionate about. And so for me, that was ending up being exposed to the Native American Student Success Center on campus and going out of my comfort zone to just ask if they had a tutoring service through the center and being able to work with the center as a whole and grow that tutoring program in the years since. And then that led to discussions with mentors and with friends about just what I was personally passionate about post-graduation and how to pursue that. And a really great liaison for that, as I'm sure everyone else can attest to, is Dr. Lee, and just forming conversations with Dr. Lee and seeing what insights she can give. And it, my personal process just kind of led the Truman to be very congruous with what I wanted to do after graduation. And so then just naturally with that, before the Truman was due, which is in December for the internal application, it was just months of working on the application and reviewing there. So that was kind of how mine kicked off. I'm gonna pass it on to Zariah.
Yeah, similarly, it was a lot of work beforehand. I think it's very important that when you're looking at these scholarships, they're much more of a stepping stone to get from the work that you've done to get to be able to do the work that you want to do. Not a whole lot of desire to just like get this cool award and not really use it for what it was intended for. So I kind of have a little bit more of a jumbled, I think, story. So I come from a really small town in Wyoming, and I think I spent the first like 2 years of undergrad just like trying to figure out how like college worked. And so I had gotten involved in the left court lab doing the neuroscience research and found out about the Goldwater first, submitted an internal application for the Goldwater, and Frances was on that committee. And then I didn't get the internal nomination because her and Dr. Lee said that they were like, this is a lot more of a Truman application than a Goldwater application. And so they encouraged me to apply for the Truman, and it ended up being a lot better fit, simply because my interests had like slowly been coming together, and I realized that I really had a passion for public service and the work that I did in Uganda, coming out with like trying to find this nonprofit that I'm working on now. And so it was due to the relationships that I had with Dr. Lee and Dr. Lefcourt that they were able to point me to a scholarship that was a good fit and a great opportunity for what I wanted to do. Um, Anyone else, feel free to answer.
Yeah, so I would definitely agree a lot with both of us. So I got the Goldwater Scholarship last year, and I remember as a freshman attending Dean Lee's seminar, Honors Presents, on just like how to apply to scholarships and what they are and stuff. And I remember thinking, there's absolutely no way that I can get to like that point to be eligible or to have it. And one of the points that she made in that talk was that it's very much that this should not be your goal. Like you should not shoot for the scholarship and make that be the highlight of your undergraduate career. You should just keep doing what you're doing, find what you're interested in, and there's probably something there for you. So within the first week or two, I was involved in research on campus, as a lot of people are here, and I just kind of stuck with that. And I continued working. I worked with more professors, and then by the time I got to my second year, I was at a place where I had that basis and it kind of fit already. Like, it kind of snuck up on me that, oh, the deadline is coming up soon, and it actually fits really well now that I've done a lot of the work in the past and have been doing what I've been wanting to have done. So
yeah, similar to everyone else, especially regarding the Schwartzman, stumbled into the relevance that had to my career. And as was mentioned in my intro, I've done some work in political campaigns, and especially the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a lot of increase in disinformation and the use of social media to impact political campaigns. And then right when I was starting to get to the start of the Schwartzman application cycle, TikTok became really big. And so that was kind of what spurred my interest in that. I don't have a TikTok or anything, but just the fact that that is a social media company that there have been a lot of security concerns around, and it's located in China, and that was what got me interested in the Schwartzman, and what became a huge part of my narrative in the application was just how quickly things are changing and how I think China is going to be really important in that going forward. But that was not a narrative that I had in my head, or I think even existed at all, before, the last year before I applied. And so I guess one takeaway for me from that was always keep your options open, because you never know. With me focusing on politics and voter registration, voter access, I never thought China was going to be relevant to that. And then all of a sudden it was. And that's kind of how I ended up deciding to apply for the Schwartzman.
Yeah, I started doing research in the Lawrence lab my sophomore year, and I fell in love with it. And so throughout that process, I was trying to secure funding from outside sources. So I applied to the Montana INBRE program, and that was really helpful for learning how to write grant proposals and talk about your research. And I think that's really essential for a scholarship like the Goldwater, because ultimately they want you to demonstrate that you can talk about your research and that you've done research. And I didn't think I was going to apply for the Goldwater until I had a meeting with my PI, and he dropped it in a conversation and told me I should apply. So I did, and that's the story. That's why I'm here today. So.
All right. Thank you so much for talking about that experience. What for you was the hardest part of the application process?
Finding the time probably to sit down and like actually hammer it out, because I mean we're all busy, right? The reason that we're applying for these kinds of things is that we have a lot going on. So just like convincing yourself or telling yourself that it's a priority and scheduling it in, because I knew going into my fall semester that I wanted to apply for Goldwater. So I made it a priority to schedule my Saturdays for the first part of the semester to actually give myself time to do that.
I think for me, it was space. For the Goldwater essay, they gave you 3 pages to talk about your research. And that includes figures and any images you want to show and references. And that's not a lot of room. You have to be very succinct and choose your words very carefully. And that is certainly a challenge in any field you might go into.
For the Schwartzman, there are only 2 essays that go into that application. One of them is called a statement of purpose, and it's a 500-word essay, and you have to incorporate in that both, kind of what your drive is, what you want to do, as well as why you want to be in China. And that was difficult for me, both because of the space constraint of, that is a lot of information to fit into not many words. But in addition to that, I really struggled with kind of coming up with a succinct version of this is what I want to do, because I definitely know generally what I want to do and kind of what I'm interested in. But that's a lot different from, being able to drill it down to the level of this is the kind of job I want to have in, 10, 15 years. And you don't always have to have that level of detail, but just being able to take all my interests from kind of this nebulous thing in my head and turn it into an actual narrative was pretty difficult, and definitely took a lot of iterations of that essay.
For me, it was articulating myself in a way that truly represented me. And so similar with Taylor, there was like the written portion of the application where I felt like I had an easier time because I had more time and more questions to be able to piece it all together. But with the Truman, there's an interview uh, that you can be selected for, and that interview was very stressful and very challenging because I wanted to make sure that that by the time I walked out of that interview, that they had a really clear picture of who I am that I would agree with. And so strategy that Dr. Lee gave me to do that I still use, like whether I have a scholarship application or any kind of interview, is do like a 3 to 5 bullet summary of everything that you are. And like you have to summarize everything that you've done, that you want to do, what drives you in 3 to 5 sentences. And so then every time you answer a question, you bring it back and like it centers around one of those really important core parts of who you are. And I think having that tool was what helped me to prepare for the interview so that I could properly articulate all of those different aspects of me and paint a really clear picture of who I am.
I'd say that similar to what Taylor and Zariah are talking about, Taylor said a word that I think is really important in this narrative, because in these scholarships, especially the written application portion, you're trying to, recapitulate who you are as a human being in like a few questions, which is inherently challenging. But also to be able to do so very methodically and like have a common line throughout. For the Truman, it's like 13 questions and a policy proposal. How can you weave in who you are as a human being and what your story is into that? And so for me, that looked like a lot of like long walks and like going outside a lot and just like introspecting rather than actually writing. And that's kind of where the really fun parts happen. And so that's why applying for these scholarships is so great, because even if you're not selected as a scholar, like getting that process to introspect and to reflect and to just go through that whole, whatever you may call it, is really spectacular.
All right, that's actually a really good transition to our next question, which is kind of part of that other question. On the flip side of what was the hardest part, what was the best part or your favorite part of the application process?
I don't know if it quite counts as the application process, but I guess like part of the interview was that the Truman, like we had us all fly into Denver, was where I did the Wyoming interview. I got to meet some really cool people at the interview, and we played like Uno together and just like all hung out. And so the like getting to meet those people at the interview was really, really amazing. And then being part of like the Truman Scholar Network has been really, really incredible as well. Lots of really great people who are really, really driven and very, very caring. And getting to be a part of that community, I think, has been the best part about like going through that really challenging process and being able to really enjoy that.
I would second a lot of that. I think the interview phase is really cool, and I had to do my interview virtually this year, unfortunately, so it was kind of detraction a little bit. But even that limited exposure to the other applicants I thought was really cool, and just got to see meet some really cool people. And so hopefully in a few years, if other folks on this or on this WebEx are applying for some of these, you'll be able to get that in-person experience, and I think that's really cool. In addition, though, I found it to be a really good opportunity to reach out to people who I consider mentors and get feedback or advice on my application and just kind of why I was doing this and what I wanted to do next after undergrad. And I think a lot of times there's not an occasion to do that and reach out and just talk to someone about, hey, what do I want to do with my life? And so that was another really great part of the experience.
I think, at least in research, like each day can kind of become monotonous after a while. You're doing the same experiments. You just plan ahead for the next day, the next week. And so when you sit down to finally start writing your application, you get to see your entire narrative come together. You get to see everything you've done and everything you've accomplished. And it's a really rewarding experience. You realize that the past 2 years of hard work have really paid off. And that's a good feeling. And you should be proud of that regardless if you win a scholarship or not.
Yeah, that's where for me the best part is really just the process in it. Especially with the Goldwater one, we had to write a kind of a summary of research of what we've done slash sort of like a proposal as the future. And it's a really good way to summarize everything that you've done right in a super professional tone, collaborate with your researchers, read a lot of papers, and you end up producing something that you can be really proud of. And again, whether you actually get it or not, like you have this experience and you have this process kind of already under your belt. So in the many times in your life in the future where you go to do this again, you can kind of fall back on that, and it's a really good head start in a lot of ways.
Kind of piggybacking on what Taylor said, I think that having people in your corner and having people vouch for you that care about you is really the most rewarding part for me. I think everyone on this call, be it someone who's won a scholarship or someone who's interested in applying, like has felt imposter bias at some point or feeling like they don't belong or like maybe they're not good enough for something. but like when you have mentors or people that you really value their opinion write a letter of recommendation for you, that's pretty exceptional. And when you apply for these scholarships, you're not allowed to read the letters of recommendation prior to their submission, but afterwards you can ask for them or you can see them, and that's a pretty incredible thing to like just know that someone wrote that about you and supports you and believes in you, and then also the opportunity to read what they said down the line a few years from then is pretty spectacular.
All right. So for each of you personally, what was the most important tool or resource while working on the application?
My research advisor. Ultimately, he's the person besides me who knows my research best. He knows what I need to talk about. He knows what to emphasize. He knows what reviewers who are also scientifically minded want to hear. That's the biggest resource and the person you should be closest with in this process. Dr. Lee was also wonderful. You can go to her with any question and any concern, and she will help you no matter what. So those two people are the best people to talk to for this.
We stand on the shoulders of giants, and I think all of us are here because someone who is older than us like applied for these scholarships, or we looked up to someone when we were freshmen, like, oh my gosh, they're so cool. And so for me, that was like those friends and mentors sending my applications to them and getting feedback before applying. That was huge. That made all the difference. And so them, as well as Dr. Lee, like Sheridan said.
It kind of, yeah, Dr. Lee, I would I would say is like, I mean, she knows like the inner workings of every one of these really, really well. She knows what the past students have done, what attributes they had in their applications. So having like a good working relationship with Dr. Lee would be one of like the most critical things that you can do for these, and because she's like great when it comes to supporting students, right? There's no one who I could name first. So if you show a true desire and have the like qualifications, like she will support you in this process and make sure that you have everything that you need.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to add on this one. Dr. Lee is incredible. And then, yeah, just talking to folks who have applied to these before and other mentors who have helped students with this before, and just using that network as much as possible definitely is the biggest help you can do yourself.
So what to you what was the most important thing to emphasize about yourself on the application?
I think it's emphasizing what means the most to you and why. And so, like, for me, I think a lot of my drive and motivation comes from like my rural upbringing and the challenges that I faced there, and like how kind of that endured in the form of like mental illness and struggles. And so emphasizing what has made me kind of who I am and how I'm using that to inspire like my career and motivate me and like overcoming that, turning it into strength, like that kind of idea is what I think was most important for me to emphasize, because it's that kind of story, that narrative of where I've been and where I'm going. Was like that kind of personal story.
I think I had a few mock interviews ahead of my actual interview for the Schwartzman. And one of the panelists there gave me some really good advice that kind of stuck with me, and I think encapsulates a lot of what I think you folks strive to do in an application, which is basically emphasize what's unique about you, and what you've done with your experiences that sets you apart from everyone else. Right. So as was mentioned in my intro, I've been student body president. Just saying, I've been student body president is not unique. Every university in the country has a student body president, right? And so it was what I'd done with that and specific experiences I could pull from and say, this was a moment, where I grew. And those specific instances where you can really highlight, this is something that I did that really challenged me or really caused me to grow, or solidified my path and what I want to do. Those are the really powerful things that will stand out in this application process and stick with with the application reviewers when they're reading through several thousand of these.
Goldwater has a personal essay and your research essay, and so my advice is a bit different for each one. I think for the personal essay, like everyone's been saying, you have to show what you're passionate about and what makes you unique. So I grew up outside of Yellowstone, and I talked about how my experiences growing up there shaped my interest in science. I wanted people to remember me. Not very many people can say they grew up outside of Yellowstone. But in terms of your research essay, you can think critically and act like a scientist. When you are proposing experiments, that's when you have a chance to shine. You're thinking critically about the next steps, and that's really important for the Goldwater and any other sort of research grant proposal.
For me, I think that everything everyone said prior to this has been really good. For me, it was really important to highlight about myself what I didn't know and like kind of where I fell short, which seems like very counterintuitive on a scholarship because like you definitely want to highlight the things you're excellent at and like what you strive at. But for me, it was especially given that a lot of my work has been cross-cultural and like with groups and identities that I do not personally relate to. It was really important to highlight like kind of where I fell short as a person there and just things I couldn't control and recognizing my imposter bias and recognizing those feelings and authentic emotions that I'd had. That was huge. And that was part of my interview as well, was recognizing that, which is challenging because no one ever likes to admit where they fall short. But that was important for me.
So, what part of the application process did you learn the most from?
For me, I would say that where I learned the most was definitely once I had like a solid draft of everything, to how I like it or to how I thought it was supposed to be, and then I go and take that to one Dean Lee, who for at least for Goldwater looks over them and kind of rips you a new one, and then secondly, like the other faculty who work at MSU who read it and give their feedback as well, right? Because I think with especially essays and general stuff like that, we kind of have a way that we want things to be, and we take a lot of pride in our thought process, and we understand why we wrote things a certain way. And then when other people who are grand wizards, so to say, and know the process a lot better, like add their feedback, it's in some ways it's kind of insulting. And so learning to kind of get over that that like initial response or reaction to that, and take the feedback as constructive, and we'll be able to work that in is where you learn the most.
I think I learned a lot about myself personally. I think, and that kind of goes back to what people were saying in the beginning, like that introspection and reflection. I think and I've applied to a few scholarships, and so I go through this process a lot, I would say. Um, and it's very rewarding every single time, and I think has really inspired a lot of the work that I'm doing currently, because it is so rewarding that I'm like, how can we teach like rural youth to also employ this process of reflection and action? And so very important, very rewarding. You not only get to see like a culmination of the work that you were doing, like what Sheridan said, but you also get to see that like how much you really have accomplished so that you can kind of counter that imposter syndrome that like Max was talking about. And having like this like kind of big clump of paper where you're just like, yeah, like I did this, like it really helps you feel really validated in the work that you're doing and the importance of it, and give you kind of confidence in who you are and help you to really know who you are and what you want to do. That kind of clear direction, or just like clear passion and toolkit of whatever direction you may go, I think is very, very rewarding and can be done in a lot of different circumstances.
I think that honestly, Franklin is right. I stomped it there with like the application thing. I don't really have much more to add there. For me, I learned the most in the interview process. Well, one thing I learned was in the interview process, and for Truman especially, and Goldwater, you don't have an interview, and then Taylor can talk to the Schwarzman interview, but Truman's very combative in the interview process, and I definitely had to learn really quick how to like stand up for an idea in the face of someone who like had authority and like was pretty confident. Where like they started off my Truman interview with the question was just like solve the U.S. healthcare system, and I like, gave an answer, and the dude was just like, "That's a terrible answer. You're wrong. Try again." And I was like, "Oh, that's not great." And like tried another answer, and he was like, "Don't like that one either. Try again." And then just gave him the last answer, and he's like, whatever." And then move on to the next question. And being able to just like put forward your ideas, be confident in them, like fight for them, and then just like move on from it. That's tough. And that definitely is something that we're all learning more and more each day. And so yeah, I think that's my thought of what I learned the most.
Yeah, similar to Max, I definitely felt like the interview process was very informative, and the Schwartzman interview is not as combative as some of the other scholarship interviews are. I think it's a bit of an exception in that way. But the two things that I felt were really rewarding is during the prep process. One of the things I was encouraged to do was just to read The Economist every day and read the Washington Post and New York Times every day. And so there was a lot of just stuff that didn't even end up being relevant to my interview, but just I would read an article about something happening in China or something happening all over the world. It was just a way to have kind of a baseline knowledge of what was happening, because they would ask in the Schwartzman interview, one of the questions they ask is a current events question, so you kind of have to have some clue of what's going on in the world. But then beyond that, I think the interview process was really helpful in forcing me to just think of the issues I care about and why I care about them, and be able to articulate that the driving force behind that for me in the context of what was going on in the world today. And that's not something I thought about on occasion, but I'd never before had a situation where I really had to synthesize it and be able to come up with essentially 30 seconds of here's why I want to do what I do, and here's why I think it's relevant. So that was a really fun experience, just be able to go through and do that.
I don't have much else to add. I think, again, like watching your story come to life and watching your narrative form over time and in your essays is really powerful. It's probably the first time you've ever sat down to actually do that and experience that process.
All right. What has been the best thing about receiving the scholarship?
This is something that has been mentioned a little bit earlier, but for me, it was realizing that a scholarship is just an accolade, and there's a lot more to life than it. I think that all of us can attest this on the panel that like when you get into honors college, it's very like tantalizing to like win a scholarship and to like have the clout that goes along with that. But for me, the best part was just realizing that like it's an incredible honor. And like Zariah said, the Truman community is so robust and so exciting. But at the end of the day, it does not define you as a human being. And this opportunity to reflect on your stories was so much more impactful than like the actual award itself. So for me, that was the coolest part, was realizing that like this was really great, but also there's a lot more to me and to life than just like that accomplishment.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, just what is the best part, the best thing about receiving the scholarship?
This is a little bit of a tricky one for me to answer because Schwartzman funds a master's program, and so I haven't gone through that yet. That's going to be next year for me. So still, yeah, still waiting on the final answer to that question. But I would say in the few months since I was awarded the Schwartzman, it's been really cool to start to get connected with that community. 2 weeks ago now, I had a Zoom conversation with about 12 other scholars from all around the world where we were talking about the ethics of working for an organization that you may personally disagree with. And it was, it was just an informal thing that one of the scholars threw together and invited everyone to. And it reminded me of a text and critics class, but kind of transplanted 5 years later. And I think that it's very special to have that kind of community and that kind of space where people are grappling with those same issues, and you're all kind of maybe not at the same place in a career, but facing a lot of the same issues. And so that's been really cool so far.
Personally, I didn't make it through the internal review at MSU the first time. I was told in an email from Dean Lee that I was runner-up, and if someone had to forfeit their position, that I would get the opportunity to. So I did not expect to win the Goldwater at all. I found out beginning of spring semester, so early January, that someone had to forfeit their position, and I was now selected internally, which was really exciting, but it also meant the application's due at the end of the month. So I had a lot of work to do between now and then. And I still, at the time, didn't believe I was qualified enough for it. Again, that's imposter syndrome talking, but I figured because I was runner-up that I probably would be runner-up in the Goldwater pool too. So just getting that phone call and confirming to yourself that you're worth it and that your work has been good, and I don't know, it was just a good feeling because I didn't think I'd ever make it there. So
I've already talked a little bit about the community, but I think the best part about that community is having, like, knowing that people so fiercely believe in you. Like, yeah, Dean Lee's like in the corner, like, yes, but having, someone who knows people from all over the country be really, really supportive and believe so fiercely in what you can do. And like her name is Dr. Terry Babcock Loomish, and she kind of is in charge of the Truman Foundation. And I had kind of a bit of a rocky relationship with her in the beginning, where she didn't like me very much. And then like midway through the summer, I was just like, I'm changing my entire career path. Like, I don't want to go to medical school anymore, which is what I was actually told in the Truman interview, that they also didn't think I should go to medical school. But I was like, no, like, I so believe in this. And and so having that conversation with her where I was like, I think I really want to change everything I'm doing, and having her be like, yes, like, we didn't invest in like this narrow career path that you chose. We invested in you because we believe in you. And having her like really follow through on that belief and commitment, and having her want to support me in any way, like me as a person, not like Zariah the Truman Scholar, has been really, really great. And so these scholarships will give you, like the Truman, I think especially, gives you an opportunity to get more people in your corner. And to share another like little story, I applied for the Dennis Washington Graduate Leadership Fellowship or Scholarship recently, and one of the Truman Scholars from 2019 with me was also a finalist for that scholarship. And so we got to help each other prep and get to know each other a lot better. And she's doing really amazing work there, but we hadn't been able to really connect yet. And so also being able to be close with Rana now, like following, like long after we both got the Truman, like it really is a community where people can support you, and you can really know that people believe in you and want to support you in any way, like long after you get the scholarship, because it's just a way for you to find people who really believe in you and for you to really believe in other people too.
Yeah. Uh, in one hand, like the money is nice, like the scholarship's nice, which no one has mentioned, but like, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a real part of it. It's the street cred is nice. The validation is nice, especially for people who suffer from imposter syndrome, which is like 90% of any sort of high achieving academic person. But like the best thing is definitely the understanding that it helps you form, for at least for me, right? When like, so I won the Goldwater, but like I don't want people to be like, oh yeah, he won the Goldwater scholarship, right? Because there's so much under that you had to build up to, which sometimes it takes having a gold medal to like understand the process, which is unfortunate. Like it would really be nice if we always could just recognize the work that we do and the effort that we put in. But after receiving this and thinking about it for a couple days, when the shine kind of wore off, it was like, yeah, that's cool, but what I did to get here was so much cooler, and is like so much easier to talk about and so much better to share. And it definitely helps you form an understanding of yourself better than any sort of name or title does.
All right. So has the scholarship itself inspired you? And if so, how?
I would say yes. Inspire is maybe not the exact word I would use, but I think like the scholarship definitely has influenced me and what I want to do. As I mentioned earlier, you know, China was never something I thought was in my career path or something I was ever going to devote a whole lot of professional energy to. And I think through the Schwartzman, through the Schwartzman application process, I looked a lot more into China and found that there really was a meaningful connection between what I wanted to do and what I was interested in and China. And so I think in that sense, going through the application process and winning the scholarship really has solidified for me that my work is with domestic politics is not necessarily going to be a domestic endeavor and potentially is something I need to look at through an international lens, whether that's through China or you know, just an international lens broadly. In addition to that, I would just say the people that I've gotten to meet so far and I hope to meet next year really do inspire me and just all the amazing things they're doing and you know the ways they're changing the world that are relevant to China, but also very distinct from what I'm doing.
I'd say like with the Truman, the scholarship like medium level like inspires me, but knowing that so many exceptional people like are Truman scholars, be them members of the Supreme Court, members of Congress, people that are in Montana making change, wherever they lie, like the people in the Truman community, like Zariah's already said, like are just so cool. And knowing that the people in my class are going to be people that are future presidents, I think, and like Congress people is so exceptional. And just forming those interpersonal relationships and getting to know them, that inspires me a lot. And that also pushes you as an individual to do better and to shoot for the stars because you're surrounded by people that are of that caliber. And so that is really inspirational for me about the Truman community.
I don't think I have much to add. It's like, yes, extremely motivating, very validating, whole lot more to life than like the scholarship, but it is very nice and big stepping stone.
We're getting close to the end of our time, so we can open it up now to Q&A from anyone in the audience. If you want to post questions in the chat, I can read them out, or feel free to unmute yourselves and read them out yourselves.
If no one has any burning questions, I do have one like tidbit I would potentially like to share if that's okay. Yeah, I think one thing I've noticed through the application process, I think there's kind of two conflicting pulls when you decide to apply to one of these scholarships that are simultaneously contrarian but also true at the same time. Because I've applied for 6 of these scholarships in total. Of those, I only received the institutional nomination for 4, and Shwartzman was the only one where I made it past the very first stage externally. And so I think the 2 pieces of advice I would give everyone thinking about applying for these is, one, you know, be prepared to just shake it off and be ready to fight another day if you apply and don't get one of these. I know very few, if any, people who have known exactly what ones they wanted to apply for and applied for just those and got them, and that was it. And a lot of times it's not even necessarily your credentials, right? A lot of these scholarships are looking to put together a class, and so something that can affect your application could just be what's the makeup of that application pool, and that changes from year to year, and that's something you can't control. So if you apply to one of these and it doesn't work out, you're not alone in that, and I would just encourage you to shake it off and move on to the next thing, whether that's another scholarship or something totally different. On the flip side of that, though, be very intentional when you apply to these. I think that's something that I ran into, especially in my earlier applications, was I sometimes would put together an application and not be as intentional about it, and it just felt a little rushed. And I think that showed through in a lot of ways. So be willing to apply for these multiple times or multiple of them, but also try and put your best foot forward as much as you can.
If I can just jump off of that too. Also, I would advise you not to modulate like the things that you do for a scholarship. Like, don't do things just to win a scholarship. Like Sheridan and Franklin can tell you that research is very hard and like takes passion in what you're doing. And Sheridan talked about the monotony day to day, and that takes a certain level of like, I'm excited to do research. I want to go in a lab and do this. And if you just do that to win a Goldwater scholarship, then you're, I think, going to be especially unhappy when you're doing research in the lab, and then once you win it, you're not going to be happy either. And so don't change the things that you're doing right now because they look good on a resume or they look good on a scholarship app where they make a narrative. Do things that you're truly passionate about, because then if you get asked about them in an interview, you'll be like, oh my gosh, let me tell you about this, I'm so excited about it, versus like, let me contrive an answer for you because I did it because I think you want to hear about it. I think that's really important to discern what those things are in your life and to think intentionally about that. Because at the end of the day, these scholarships are not worth your personal happiness, because you being happy, I think, is a lot more important than like this line on your resume.
Yeah, I can echo that completely. Like, find something you are passionate about and everything else will fall into place. Opportunities will come your way because people realize your passion and your interest in something, and that is better than vicious checkboxing. So.
And you'll still have a passion even if you don't get a scholarship.
Haley actually gave me some super great advice. Haley Cox on this call is also a Truman Scholar. And she said, she was like, live your life or plan your life as though like you don't get this. Like, what happens? And you kind of just prepare for that, like prepare to not get it, because then you're like, wow, I'm still a complete person. I'm still whole. Like, my life is, there's so many other doors that will open, even if this one doesn't. And that's just another way of articulating like what has already been said, that the scholarship is not like a part of your identity or should not be why you do things at all. Like, you will make more of an impact if you're doing it for the right reasons, whether you get the scholarships or not.
I actually have a question, just my own personal question for you guys. What was your biggest ambition prior to receiving a scholarship, and what is your biggest ambition now? And it's kind of connected to what you were talking about, like, what is your passion and your drive?
I will happily talk about this one because it's changed so much. Well, I guess coming to college freshman through like sophomore year, I was like, I just want to go to medical school. And then I did the research project in Uganda that I designed. And then I was like, I want to do an MD PhD program. And that was still the plan when I applied for the Truman. And then like halfway through senior year, like right before the pandemic, I was doing a lot of internal soul searching and realized that the idea of medical school just filled me with so much fear and anxiety, and I wasn't able to live a life of balance with like that goal in mind. And so I applied for the Samuel Huntington Fellowship, which funds a year of meaningful public service. So they give you a $15,000 grant to support you as you do that. And that award enabled me to work full time this past year on the nonprofit that I've been founding, Positivity Outward. And then the more time that I spent on that, the more time that I was like, this is really, really what I want to do. And so now I'm doing that master's through the business school here at MSU next year. And then after that, I'll do a PhD. And so lots of different plans, and slowly coming into that plan through like that process of reflection and introspection. I don't think like my plans were ever like wrong. They've just become more informed by the experiences that I've been able to have. So now I feel really fulfilled by the work I get to do every day. I'm not overwhelmed at the idea of having to like go to medical school, and which I think is a great fit for some people, but I can't do it anymore. um, and so and really finding that like my passion all along has been like wanting to empower others and give people the tools that they need to be able to follow their dreams. It just kind of started as like a volunteer thing and like a side thing and has slowly become that full-time focus. But if I would have just been like, no, I need to like do this, like I have to do this, I think I would have really lost myself along the way.
For the scholars.
Um,
Oh, go ahead, Sheridan.
no worries. I knew before I applied for the Goldwater that I wanted to go to graduate school in science in some capacity. Throughout the Goldwater process, I sort of learned a lot about my personal interests and what I did want to study in graduate school. So that hasn't really changed, but I've applied to graduate schools. I'm attending a PhD program in the fall. And so my interests haven't changed, but I've narrowed in and I've focused in on something. So
For the scholarship, I wanted to like build cancer drugs and like be a researcher there. And now I'm moving to Sitka, Alaska in the fall and be a college and career counselor. So it changes a lot, and that's the cool thing about scholarships is kind of realize that more, working with people side of things is exactly what I want to do and changing those types of paradigms. So don't be afraid for things to change. Hopefully you can take that away from all of us sharing this.
Yeah, I would say I don't have a super specific, this is the job I want to do in mind. I've become really interested through undergrad in voter protection, and I think I'm headed to law school at some point, and probably I would ideally like to get involved with an organization like the ACLU or some other, voting rights organization. With that being said, that's a very, nebulous career ambition, and I think I'm hoping that through the Shwartzman experience and doing the master's program next year, I'll be able to refine that or potentially challenge that and find, if that is really what I want to do, just through the experience of getting to share or getting to talk with folks who care about a lot of the same things I do, but maybe are approaching it from a different lens or have experience with some of the professors in that program.
Well, thank you all so much for coming today and sharing your experiences. And it's been super fun to hear about, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.